Thank you very much for inviting me and Energia to this session. I will just share my screen now. First of all, to just say it's sort of a privilege to be hearing from all the presenters today, and in particular hearing the European perspective, because we often talk about gender and immediately people, at least in my sector, think about developing countries and how they are failing. But this obviously shows we're all failing, which is not a comfort, but it also shows that there are a lot of lessons, I think, that we can learn from each other. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. Well, for today's presentation, the title of the session, of course, is Capacity Building and Networking. And there's a lot that has already been said by some of the partners. And as an Energia, there's a lot that we have in common with groups like WECF in how we approach the question of reducing gender gaps in the energy sector in all aspects. So what I thought I would do is to take a little bit of a detour and actually look at what we've done or what we've learned in the past in a very quick way for 10 minutes, but to also focus about transforming the energy food for women and by women in the post-COVID future that we all face. To begin with, just to begin about little bit about Energia. It's the International Network on Gender and Energy, and it was founded in 1996 with partners from 15 countries in Africa and Asia. And so it's very much a sort of a grassroots-based organization, or it was catalyzed organization. And it was really created as an institutional base for mainstreaming gender equality and women's empowerment in the energy sector. And our focus has been developing countries. And when we talk about empowerment and equality, we look at the whole chain. So we look at policy making, we look at enabling environment in the sector. So whether they're intergovernmental processes or national processes or public campaigns, trying to create an enabling environment for that. We also look at women's economic empowerment in terms of women participating in energy value chains at all levels. So whether it's very small energy technologies or community energy or even grid energy, actually. We also work with networking. It's a huge part of our efforts to transform the sector. And this is really to try to create partnerships and to create a common voice on the linkages between gender and energy. And by doing that, to strengthen the voice, to strengthen the changes, as well as to learn from each other with other networks. Another thing that we hope to do is to become thought leaders in research and innovation on gender and energy.
You've muted your microphone.
By the host. Yeah, great. Yeah, so we would like to be thought leaders, and by that we mean to lead the research and innovation in how do we reduce gender gaps right across the energy sector. And we do that by gathering evidence on what's going on gender and energy globally. So in terms of COVID, just jumping a little bit to the whole issue of COVID, one of the things is it's become a concern to Energia particularly is that we are seeing a lot of impact or distinctive impact that COVID is having on energy and gender. So we have worked, as I've said, since 1996, and we've made great strides in including women. We've seen women increasingly participate in value chains and in policy making. And suddenly COVID comes, and we're already beginning to see some sort of loss in the gains that we have made. Just talking about, for example, in the value chains, we have noted some increases in prices of products that, some of which are key to women's access to energy. So, for example, solar lanterns, which are very popular at the moment in areas like Africa and Asia, in remote areas. But also, in some cases, just the need to strategize around how you can access it. So, of course, with the flights closed and most of these technologies being imported into African countries or some of the Asian countries, there's been a limitations in how to access technology, leading to price increases or having to travel further. And of course, that limits women more because they have, less access to technology, have more mobility issues and lower incomes to strategize around that. Talking to some of our suppliers or people that are involved in the supply chain, one of the efforts in reducing the COVID pandemic, of course, has been to limit gatherings. But over the last sort of 30 years, women's development in particular has centered around mobilizing women in groups. So when they cannot gather, then they affect how they access technology and how they access support services for those technologies. We've also seen disruptions to how energy finance, the channels that women use for financing energy technology, for getting energy information, and for getting energy technologies for themselves. So in the past 5-6 years, we've seen a huge leap in how village saving loan groups or women's groups are used as channels for accessing energy technology or information or energy finance. And of course, now they cannot meet, or the cost of meeting is much, much higher, because then they have to provide all the let's say, accessories that have become part of COVID gatherings, the face masks and the sanitization things. And that has also limited how women can access technology. One trend that we're seeing as a way of coping with these limitations is that a lot of companies have gone to pay-go systems. And these pay-go systems have been beneficial for women, and this has been reported extensively. But it must also be mentioned that women are not the same. Earlier on in the morning, somebody quoted Crenshaw, which is the intersectionality in gender, and that's the same. Not all women actually access pay-go. There are a lot of women who don't have access to e-mobile services. They might not have smartphones, or they might not trust pay-go systems, and they would prefer face-to-face interactions. And so it's sort of this almost universal shift to pay-go is actually a disadvantage to largely the most excluded women, actually. One positive from, that has emerged, I guess, is that we've seen that where community power or community energy is a way of providing access, it's been a little bit less affected because there's a little bit less need for travel, there's a little bit less need, they have structures put in place, so they're not as disrupted as by the disruption of flights as much as, say, portable solutions. However, community power, at least in Africa and also to a large extent in Asia, has not meaningfully involved women. So when you look at community power or mini grids, for example, very few of them have women in key positions or taking key decisions on them. So although those seem a little bit more resilient, that resilience is not really benefiting women as much. There's COVID support coming in, for example, new loan facilities, new financing schemes, but these are largely gender blind. So again, the recovery from COVID is not taking into consideration women's needs or women's barriers to accessing such support. Of course, women's care burdens are increasing. Again, people have talked about care burdens and unpaid work, and that with especially in resource poor communities, like say where I come from in Malawi, it means more we need to collect, water. If you really want to get very preventative, then you need to sterilize say, beddings of people that might have COVID and things like that, or you need more trips to the healthcare centers. And that has just increased the burden of women, but that support that energy can provide to alleviate those burdens is not available. There's also increased need for appliances, powered appliances, which of course community power could play a huge role in. And even before COVID, we have research that shows that women are disproportionately burdened from indoor air pollution from cooking with traditional fuels like firewood on open fires. And if your respiratory system is compromised, then there's a high likelihood that the impact of COVID on the health of women might be quite disastrous in developing countries. And with respect, of course, to COVID, and Energy is already doing some work on that. And some of the trends that we're seeing is that there's a decline in incomes for women energy entrepreneurs, and just difficulties in accessing finances for their businesses. So already we are seeing impact, and that impact is quite high, even just over 3 months. And we expect that to be even much more impactful or adverse over the next, we are sort of in the 9th month, 10th month of COVID now. So we as an Energy are proposing a couple of changes if we are to really include women in building better after COVID, and if we are to transform the sector. There are a couple of propositions, and I will not get to all the propositions here because of time. But some of the propositions we make is that there's an increasing need to work with women-focused companies and women-focused initiatives. Many here are already women-focused initiatives. In developing countries, we've got initiatives such as Solar Sisters that are very women-centric. And they really already have the connections and the contacts on the ground with women and good experience of working with women and knowing what works and what doesn't work. COVID also, and the situation of women in general in energy, calls for a need for financing women-led energy businesses, providing them with business development support. So for example, how do they write bankable proposals, and how do they approach banks or other financial institutions for finances? There's need to support more women in tech. This is women working on community power projects or any other energy projects, from operations to maintenance to management of their systems, but also providing more distinctive and more targeted support for energy access for women, and making sure that that energy access does help mitigate the energy burdens or the new burdens that women are facing. One trend that we expect to emerge in this sort of post-COVID is an increase in male out-migration, particularly from rural areas, because of course the economies have been hit. Many are traditionally seen as the bread earners, and they have an easier time sort of migrating. And that, in a way, on one hand, it increases burdens for women because they have to take up men's work, hence the need for more support for their burdens. But at the same time, it showcases women as a resilient channel for energy access. So, if you're a company really wanting people in the rural communities that will stay and build energy businesses, then the women are there already. And it also creates an opportunity for them to participate. But that opportunity that it creates has to be supported from sort of upstream support to these women. One example we have of this, and this was not COVID in particular, but Energy did some research in Nepal, where we saw huge levels of male migration to the Gulf states. And in rural Nepal, women staying behind a lot. And that created, in some cases, spaces for women to take on businesses that were traditionally male-dominated businesses. So that did create that opportunity for women. But such opportunities need to be supported externally or from upstream policies and actions. Productive uses of energy is often cited as an example for helping people in developing countries, both men and women, in terms of development goals in general. But what we've observed, again, from our research with Energia in many countries, in Nepal, in Kenya, and in other places, is that most of this productive use of energy tends to benefit men, because people tend to power things like irrigation, which are male dominated, or carpentry, which is male dominated. So what we also need is to start focusing on women's businesses, what women are already doing, and supporting those, and then also supporting women entering male dominated businesses. The responses, of course, have to be varied because, like I said, women are not the same and they face a range of burdens. So it has to start from, lighting and cooking or processing, providing community power that goes beyond a few watts per household, to really enable a step change or transformative change in these women's lives. But also amplifying women's voices at all levels. So we're talking about women in the villages. What do they really want, as opposed to what we feed them as what they want? Supporting women that are in policy making, supporting female students in universities and technical colleges, and understanding what challenges they face and how they can be supported in their studies, but also post-studies in entering the employment space, which is typically blind to women's, particularly young women's needs, but also disabled women and disabled youth. Thank you very much. I hope I did not extend beyond my time, but I would like to welcome you all to visit Energia's website and look at some of our research that we are working on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maggie. And it's been great seeing right from the beginning, talking about gender gaps and moving all the way to seeing how we can begin to build back better. So thank you so much for highlighting how COVID has hit women as one of the most vulnerable groups, as well as how we can do better moving forward to ensure that women are supported during this crisis.